In earlier tutorials, we glanced at creating sequences. Here, we'll look at what sequences are exactly, why we need them, and how we can use more than one when creating complex projects. Just before we get to that stage though, I'll briefly explain the history behind sequences. This will make it easier to understand how we employ sequences within Premiere Pro. Historically or traditionally, working with analog footage, editing the physical film was called cutting. And this was because the film editor literally did that. He or she physically cut the film at the in and out points required. This was repeated numerous times, so that the original film was cut into often hundreds of short, clipped sections. At that point, all these good or clipped or cut sections were joined together to make a new composite whole. Of course, today we use non-linear editing programs like Premiere Pro to digitally cut original film sections into shorter sections after we have ascertained which parts to retain. In the last tutorial, we saw the best method for this was to use the source monitor. Well, once multiple video files have been cut into shorter good sections, they need assembling into the correct order, or, as we understand now, the correct sequence. And it's at this point we need to create our first sequence. You can create a new sequence prior to using the source monitor to trim the videos, but at some point you will need a sequence to place the clips in the order that you wish them to run. So I've got this sequence here set already, but to quickly go through the process from scratch, I'll remove it by selecting it first of all and hitting delete on my keyboard. Okay, so now let's walk through the simple process again of creating a new sequence. Okay, so here's the simplest method of creating a new sequence. Go up to File and choose the first option, New. Then fly out and choose the second option down, Sequence. Notice the shortcut is Ctrl+N. As a consequence, this new sequence dialog opens up, whereby we can choose a preset from one of these many categories. As you know, I'm in the UK, so I'd rather use DV-PAL. But if you're in the USA, go for DV-NTSC. Or indeed you can choose any of those other option categories too. Anyway, I'll go for DV-PAL and the preset here, widescreen 48 kHz. You'll see how this preset is comprised at the right with those information areas. If you're just starting with this, you'd be as well to leave the preset alone and OK it to use it. But if you wish to adjust it slightly, come up here and choose the second tab along, Settings. It's within here you'll see how the preset has been made and which parameters you can adjust. I'm not going to change anything on the whole, but feel free to adapt to suit your project. You'll notice there's a third tab too, Tracks. You can set this up here to adapt the track count or the track type, i.e. do you want to add in further audio tracks or video tracks. You can increase your video track from 3 to 4 or however many. With your audio tracks, you get quite a number of options. Do you want stereo, 5.1, mono, etc.? You can also rename your tracks. So instead of that one being called Audio 4, you could call it SFX, short for sound effects. So once you are happy, you can change here, as we've seen, and once you are done, you need to click here to save this as part of the preset. Now even though I've added and adjusted here, I'm not going to save it. I'll just go back to the Sequence Presets tab instead. And because I'm okay with it, I could OK this now. Actually, just before I do, I want to give it a more identifiable name first. So rather than it being called sequence number 2, I'll call it Beach A. So now I'll OK it, and there we go. This Beach A sequence has been brought into our project panel. And over in the sequence panel, you'll see a new tab has been created with those preset track count parameters in place. Okay, now I'm going to finish up for this tutorial, and in the following tutorial we'll look at using the source monitor to trim sections to place on our timeline, and also how to implement multiple sequences. Remember, I did say we could create a new sequence prior to trimming within the source monitor,